welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, you're very kind. And Jenny, I thank you and Carol Bett for getting me on this program. And I want to compliment the 120 Strong for the active positions that you all have taken over the last few years to have influence in how education is taken in the state of Kentucky. We need more and more of that. And thank all the teachers for just what you do. This year has been tremendously challenging. I just can't imagine, but you pulled it off extremely well. And thanks for that. Yeah, Patsy and I started first grade in Arlington. I'm going to give you a little of my background, and then I'm going to talk about this relationship between education and economic development. And then I'll go back and talk about what I've learned about preparing students for the world as it is now, and what I've learned about the Kentucky economic development efforts. But first, I won't go through my background quickly because Jenny read quite a bit of it, but we started first grade in Arlington, independent school system. Didn't have as much as some schools did, but the teachers we had were absolutely wonderful and put their lives into our lives. Most of them were not married and dedicated to us. One thing that happened when I was there, and I have it with me, is one reason I'm so supportive of education, hands-on education. This is a kit, and I got it the last day of the junior year. I was walking out of the Arlington Higher Education building, and Mr. Fulkerson, our math and science teacher, called for me to come in his lab. And he said, I got this box from Bell Laboratories, and I know they sent them to me so I would buy a bunch of them, but we don't really have the budget for doing that. But I thought you might like it, so I just wanted to give it to you. For one thing, I talk a lot about self-esteem. My self-esteem went up significantly at that point in time, which I think is so important for Kentucky kids. I took it home, and it had a book in it that you read about how to wind a coil around to make an inductor, and use wax paper and aluminum foil to make a capacitor, and put them together, and you could actually shine a light on this solar cell and it would make a noise, and had all the bits and pieces to make that little circuit. I did it on our kitchen table, and I think I woke my parents up because when it first beeped and made some noise, I was just elated. It's the first time that I had really seen math and science make something. I gave a speech back when I was on the Partnership for Education Reform in the early days of CARA. It was called Why I'm an Engineer. And I give all the credit to this little box. And that's why I've really been a supporter for hands-on education all along. Went to Murray State University, it's the closest university to Arlington, and for 2 years studying pre-engineering. Did a lot better than I thought I would do. You have to kind of gain your self-esteem your confidence as you do things among other people. I transferred to UK because I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted a 4-year engineering degree, and had an extremely positive experience my senior year. I got a note in my classroom from a professor. It asked me to go see him, and I'm just thankful to the Lord that I went then on Friday, late Friday afternoon, and he was in his office because that doesn't happen all the time on late Fridays. But he said, Dr. Edward Teller is on campus this weekend. He's the father of the hydrogen bomb, notoriety for that. He did a lot of other things in physics. He said he's going to give some lectures, but he wants to meet some students. And so I said, would you like to meet him? And of course, I said, sure. So I went over to the physics building the next morning, and he was interviewing about 10 students at a time. He'd ask your name, your grade point standing, your favorite subject, and then he'd ask you a question. If you've ever seen him or see, he had big bushy eyebrows, a very thick Hungarian brogue. He's just a tough individual. One of my friends was answering his question and Teller said, no, it's obvious you don't know what you're talking about, and went to the next one. So not your friendly interviewer. He came to me and he asked, it was right before lunch, he said, would you mind to stay for a few minutes? And then he told me later I'd been recommended to him by someone. He said, can you come back after lunch? I said, well, yes, sir, I'd be glad to. When I went back, I came around the door and he was sitting at the desk, and first thing he said is, what's your favorite subject? Well, I'd had time to think as he went through and grilled these other fellows and ladies. And I said, electronic circuits. I figured that's as far from his field as I could possibly get. Couldn't think of a question for about, he thumbed his pencil with an eraser on it for a while. And finally said, what are you taking? And I told him. He started asking questions. So about an hour, he asked questions. I thought he was trying to compare the hillbillies of Kentucky to the kids at Berkeley. He was teaching freshman physics at Berkeley at the time. But at one point he came to me and he said, what would you like to study? I said, I'd like to study solid state electronics. That was the hot stuff back in those days. And he said, well, you'll go to MIT. And he said, have you applied? And I never, ever dreamed, I knew about MIT, never dreamed that I would ever do that. And he said, I'm in charge of the Hertz Foundation scholarship program. He had convinced Mr. and Mrs. Hertz, who he knew well, they were both, all three were Hungarian refugees. He said, I've convinced them to give 12 fellowships a year to people in the applied sciences. And we haven't given away this year. It's late December. He said, I'll get you one, but if I can't, I'll get something else. And 2 weeks later, I got a telegram from him saying that I got a full ride to go to MIT. So that's how I got there. People often wonder how that happened. I was kind of nervous when I went to Murray, really nervous when I went to UK because it was bigger than anything else we'd done. But when I was at MIT, I really felt a bit out of place. There aren't many Southerners up there. You feel like everybody else is a genius and you're just kind of staying up all night working these weird problem sets and so forth. But I did, as Jenny mentioned, I got 6 patents in my doctoral thesis work, and it began to make me feel like I could compete, I could fit. One thing I tell students when I talk to them is there's a salesman that used to come to me and he said one time, he said, you know, Lee, I never thought people in the South were very smart because you speak so slowly. And I said, well, John, I hope you're not selling today because it's not a good opening. But I tell the students too, I said, each time I would get a patent, I'd find him lurking around a coffee pot somewhere and I'd go up and say, John, I just got another patent, you know, and you just kind of twist that knife a little bit. And you can do it, but you do have to be aware that there are some things we have to overcome. And I always tell the students, you've got to speak English properly. When you go on the world as it is now, many of your customers and business partners, you may never meet, but you'll talk to them a lot. And by what you say and how you say it will make an impression on them, and it needs to be the best impression. One thing that really happened to me up there is I got smitten by the high-tech startup environment. You had Amar Bose of Bose Acoustics company was on my master's committee. I got to know real well a gentleman named Henry Kloss, who had founded several companies. One of them was called Advent, who made the first large screen television. He was around the corner. And got to know another young man, John Masuris, who he and his freshman friend at Harvard had started a ceramic engine company, raised $1 million while they were freshmen. It didn't make it, but he introduced me once to one of his investors. And his investor said, well, John, you made a good run at it. And I've already written it off. So got any other ideas? I thought, boy, I tell you, if you fail like this in Kentucky, you'd have to leave the state, you know. But they had risk takers. They had people who were willing to take a chance. And it made a big impression. There's so many startup companies that are in the Boston area that they create a lot of jobs, and not just for four-year graduates or graduate students. You know, you have to have the full cadre of people to make a company run. Well, at the end of that period of time, Patsy and I chose to come back to Kentucky. There was an opening on the electrical engineering department, so I'd always thought that would be where I'd end up in life, as being a professor. I thought that would be cool. I did that for 9 years, and I watched 80% of the students that I taught leave the state of Kentucky to find jobs. And they were your students out there in the classrooms. And I used to say, you lose their children, you lose their children's children, because and we can't afford to lose that kind of talent. I had assigned my patents to a company called Advent Corporation up in Massachusetts. And in the 73, 74 recession, they went bankrupt. Their $3,000 big screen TVs weren't selling very well at 20% interest. And so I had to make a decision. I went over to Arby's across the campus and sat there and had lunch with myself. And if the Lord came to me and said, if you want to have a company, you got to stick your neck out and your wife's neck out as well, and take this by the horns and make something happen. So I called Advent and I offered to buy their equipment. And I needed it to make the picture tubes I had. I started talking to some of the students that I knew were having job offers around the country at AT&T and Bell Labs and Hewlett Packard and other places. And they ended up starting a company called Projectron we developed a very special picture tube for flight simulators. These are the big simulators that UPS uses for their pilots in Louisville, but we sold them all over the world, and we had 85% of that market for picture tubes. Each tube sold for $3,000, and you need 9 of them to make a big color image, which was kind of fun. And they burned them out once a year, so it was didn't have a business course, but that worked out. And my main customer was England, but 80% of the people that worked at that company were vocationally trained or community college trained. The vocational schools are still there at that time. And I make the point that you need all kinds of people. When you talk about technology companies, you need high tech, low tech, no tech. You need people who are bright, problem solvers, collaborative, to work together. That's the company that Hughes Aircraft purchased in 1990. And I was able to convince them to move their picture tube operations from New Jersey, from Carlsbad, California, and from Atlanta, Georgia, here to Lexington.
Wow.
And there was no big tax incentive given to them. Didn't offer them anything. The reason they came was because they felt that the product we made was very sophisticated. And so we were able to do that. The people we had were wonderful people, hard workers, and they got to know them. And they loved the Lexington area, good place to live. So we can attract people like that. There was no place in Lexington to put a company. They wanted to build about 165,000 square foot high-tech facility. And so I worked with Dr. Roselle initially and Dr. Wethington after Roselle left to convince the university to convert Coldstream Farm into the research campus. And the big white building that's out there, if you ever go by, is one that we built, and I ran that for a while. I started another company after the recession. I needed to raise at least $1 million to start a company called DataBeam. And that was my real dream company. It's for high resolution teleconferencing. This was before high resolution was really known, but my goal was to be able to present documents that you could actually read on the screen, and you could interact with it like you do right now with Zoom and other things. That we were doing this back in 83, 84. Our first contract was Star Wars. We had NASA for the shuttle recovery program. When the Discovery launch was made after the shuttle disaster, they used 8 of our systems to communicate around the country with all their divisions to make sure that everybody was comfortable with the liftoff after they didn't want another disaster. We got into Procter & Gamble and Johnson & Johnson and so forth. We made a transition from making our own boards and hardware systems to software. And eventually IBM bought that company in 1998. And the real key I want you to know in that case is 80% of those employees were 4-year degree individuals. They were computer scientists and accountants and engineers and so forth. And so with the two companies were quite different, but were both successful with the talent mixture that we had. After IBM bought DataBeam, I became senior vice president of Lotus, their software division, for a couple of years. And then President Wethington let it be known that he was going to retire. And I was nominated for the UK position, but I didn't apply for about 3 months. I just couldn't envision being president of UK. I mean, that's big stuff. I would tell the people that were after my application that they want to see more economic development work going on. And so I'll be able to help whoever you hire, but I'm not sure I want to work with athletics and all the stuff that has to happen at UK. But they had a conference, this is the point when Governor Patton was asking them to become a top 20 research university. The board of trustees was going to have a research conference to talk about that. And they asked if I would speak. And I said, well, I'll do that. That's right up my alley. So I gave a talk and I entitled it, "The 10 Things UK Should Do to Become a Top 20 University." When I sat down, the fellow that had been asking me said, "If you didn't want to be president of UK, you shouldn't have given that talk." He said, "I'm going to have everybody in here on your case." I went to Boston. I was working out of Boston quite a bit, and it really began to eat at me. It hadn't been keeping me awake until then, but it finally occurred to me that it was probably the best job in the state to have influence on education, economic development at that level. came home. Patsy and I were having coffee on Saturday morning, and I looked at her and I said, I need to talk to you about this UK job. She said, I've been waiting for 3 months for you to bring it up. I think you've been training for it all your life. And so I tried to get in. They were actually interviewing finalists, so I did get into the group to be interviewed. And I told that committee, the search committee, I said, it's not as if I've just all of a sudden decided I want to be out of business and into education. I'd had my secretary count. I'd given 88 speeches in Kentucky before that to anybody that would listen, talking about economic development and education. And when I made the finalists, there were 3 of us went to campus. Each one of us had one day. I went into the faculty group. I had 7 hours of interviews. When I went into the faculty group, my host told me, he said, well, this will be your toughest group. I said, well, why is that? He said, well, the ones who will show up are the ones who don't want you. So that's helpful. I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, a couple of things. One, you're an engineer, and engineers are generally not believed to be broad enough to be university presidents. And secondly, you've been tainted by business. And this is when I talk about education and economic development, some people think it's either one or the other. It's either or, and it's not. In my mind, it's got to be both. I mean, you've got professors who would never want to do economic development, but some of them should want to be, and you should hire some who want to be. Well, I opened it up, gave them a little 5-minute pitch about why I should be president, opened it up for questions, and this little lady on the front row stood up. She must have been, every bit of 4 feet 5 inches tall. And everybody got really quiet because they knew who she was, And she started out by saying, you scare me to death, talking about entrepreneurship and economic development. Said, I'm in the philosophy department, you're going to run these children's minds. And I said, well, you and I need to have a philosophical conversation about the future of Kentucky. If we don't change our economy, you're not going to have a real strong philosophy department. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'll go further than that. I feel as much of an obligation to create job opportunities associated with university personnel as I do educating these students, because we're losing them if we don't educate them, losing a lot of them. Mm-hmm. So anyway, the other questions were kind of harsh like that as well. But I made it somehow out of the other 6 interviews, I guess I did. When I was at UK, I really tried to put an emphasis on several things. One was redoing the undergraduate curriculum. And won't go into detail. If you were at UK before that, you had to select so many from group A and so many from group B. And if you didn't select the right ones, you might be there forever. But we put Ernie Yanarella in charge of a committee to try to fix that. The other thing that I wanted to do was to stress entrepreneurship. So I started an E-Club, an entrepreneurship club, and I was the faculty advisor for that. And I made it known that we need anybody on campus who's interested in starting a business. As the people in the arts may not know it, but they're all entrepreneurs. They've all got to go out and negotiate a contract for what they're worth. They've got to deal with customers and be gauged by their success with their audiences and so forth. And so that was the first way to try to get students to think about starting companies. When I had come back from MIT to teach at UK, the students would ask me, what are some differences between MIT and UK? And I remember telling them that, well, for one thing, if you walk through the student lounge on Monday morning, they're not talking about basketball. They're talking about changing the world. Mm-hmm. And secondly, they didn't come to MIT expecting to work for somebody else all their lives. I said, many of us came to UK wanting to get a degree and get a job. They want to get a degree and create a job. And that's really more important now than it ever has been before. Mm-hmm. So that's one reason I want to get it across with that E-Club. The other thing I stressed was healthcare. I came up with an expression of the Kentucky Uglies. I was actually in Hazard in our health center one day, and I went up to the second floor where I was going to speak, and there's a bulletin board with all these statistics on it. We had leaders in spina bifida, leaders in lung cancer, obesity, diabetes, you go down the list. I said, this is just ugly. And I realized we don't talk about it, we accept it. And so I changed my talk to the chamber, I guess it was that day. And I said, I want to talk about the Kentucky Uglies. I said, I'm a native Kentuckian. I've heard all the life, we don't have teeth, we don't wear shoes, we're sick and overweight and all that. But we don't talk about them, we don't solve them. And so I want to say that we need this university's best minds working on Kentucky's toughest problems. We're challenged to be a top 20 research university. We could do that just by doing research that corporations and federal government wants us to do, but we could fail the state of Kentucky. If we don't do things to change the lives in Kentucky, we're not a land grant university. So that changed, and probably the only thing is, if you Google Kentucky Athletes, you'll see quite a few hits because it kind of caught on. The other area that I really felt strongly about was the STEM education. I don't think everybody should not be a scientist. I'm certainly not in favor of saying that people need to be trained to do a skill and don't take French or literature or whatever. I'll say more about that in a minute. But I do believe that we have to remove the intimidation factor around STEM because it's in everything we do nowadays. And we got to soften the blow to let people know that this isn't brain surgery, it isn't rocket science. There are things that you need to do on a daily basis. So we got a $10 million grant for the Appalachian Math Science Systemic Initiative. And then I started a group called PIMSR, which was trying to make sure that when that money ran out, because the NSF gives you these 5-year, what I call wonder grants. You do it for 5 years and you wonder what you're going to do next because they don't give you any follow-on money. So I put in place PIMSR to take up the slack once we learn things through the AMSP grant. I want to make sure that we use those to populate them around the country. So some of you may have had experience with PIMSR. So those are some of my areas of focus. A lot of it, Pat and I spent a ton of time with students, and I think it's a big job. And you have a lot of the politics you have to deal with. But I chose those 4 areas that I really want to make sure. And the healthcare area has really taken off. The hospital, if you've not been in it, and I hope you aren't in it for any real reason, but it's magnificent and it's getting better and better. We are designated now as a National Cancer Institute, which is very important to do. And Tim Mullett, one of our doctors, has just been named the head of the Cancer Commission for the nation. And so that's paying off. I retired from UK after 11 years, but I want to say now some things about what I learned going through education and working with students. We really need stronger career counseling in high schools. I'm not asking teachers to do it. We need some resources. I know you need mental health help with the students, and I certainly applaud that. But professional counseling is really important. CPE and the Kentucky Board of Education are trying to work together to soften that gap between high school and college or community college. And one way to do it is to try to get these students to go where they should be. And 2 examples came to mind as I was thinking about my best friend and the best man in our wedding was crazy about cars when we were growing up. He knew everything about every car and so forth. But when he was graduating, he was told, you got to go to college. And a lot of us back in that era, it's kind of a prestige point for your child to go to college. Well, he was told he should go to college, and he did. He went to 3, dropped out of all 3 of them. I often wonder what would have happened if he had been told to go to the vocational school or community college and get a background in automotive repair, mixed with some business classes, mixed with a little computer science. He ended up, after he went through those colleges, be a car salesman for a period of time. And then he worked to help manage a drag race strip. And then he started a company or a group that redid cars. But I do believe that he was sharp enough to have done more than that if he'd been put in the right place. And I have said, and I've gotten in trouble sometimes, saying not everybody needs to go to a 4-year school. It's just there's other things to do. The other one I think of in the other extreme is a young man that I hired as a draftsman at Projectron. And he'd gone through the vocational school. He had been told by his school that his parents had gotten a divorce. He'd had a tough senior year. You just need to hurry up and get a job. So go ahead and get a 2-year degree or certificate. And he did. After we had Eric in place for about 3 months, the engineers and all 3 knew this kid can do a lot more. So we convinced him to still work at Projectron, and we let him off to do his classes, but he ended up getting an engineering degree. And the last position I know he was in is he was managing one of the lighting divisions here in Kentucky. One of the, it wasn't Osram, it's one of the big lighting ones that's owned by the Germans or Japanese, somebody. And he could have shortened that by a couple of years, probably, if he had gone to the right spot. But it's hard to do. I mean, you're really placing a bet. But the children and many of their parents, my parents didn't go to college, and so I wasn't sure what I was going to do. But we need some professional counseling that really know what the career opportunities are and find a way to get them in the right spots. The other thing I would say is the hands-on learning. I've mentioned that because of this kit that I got. But I have seen so many students to not take classes because they're either intimidated by them or they aren't interested in them. But you put them in something like Project Lead the Way, or you put them someplace where they can get their hands on something and they make it. And all of a sudden the light goes on and they're willing to commit themselves to doing more. And again, I think it's important to have more people who are knowledgeable in that case. The other point is that students now need a much broader education than what I got when I went through engineering. I've never failed, and my wife has been strong in the languages. She started a primary program in languages here in Fayette County many years ago when she was on that primary project. But these students that are graduating now are going to work with people in other countries. Those countries know so much more about us than we know them. And you'll find yourself in Germany talking to some people, and they'll talk about all the sites they've seen in America and so forth. And you kind of know World War II, and that's kind of your impression possibly, and that's not broad enough. And also they need the arts. When we tried to make some major hires, the early days we couldn't attract people to come to Kentucky to do technology. But finally we got to where we could. But one of the biggest questions we got from a couple of these hires we were trying to make is, do you have ballet lessons for our daughter? Do you have performances that our kids can attend? And to broaden a community, you need the arts. Our daughter did a national tour of Annie when she was 8 and 9 years old, in a bus and truck tour. Patsy went with her the whole time. But she told us not long ago that when she was in New York, that's what really helped make her, what she is today. She got her confidence that way. So having a broader education is going to make you much more capable when you get in this workplace. I was on a committee with the Vice President of Human Resources for Boeing. And he said one day, he said, I don't think I've ever fired an engineer because they couldn't do engineering. But I've fired plenty of them who couldn't work with other people, who couldn't meet a deadline, who couldn't take responsibility. Then he kind of looked up at the ceiling. He said, this thing we used to call the soft skills, the non-techie stuff, and I really think they're harder skills. Mm-hmm. And this was a meeting between university presidents and business CEOs. And he said, I really would urge the universities to emphasize more the collaboration, the problem solving, and the whole person, if you will, from an educational point of view. So I think the students need to know that there's an expectation in this marketplace that you need to be able to be broader than just a technician that just does one thing. I get to rambling here if I'm not careful. Let me turn now to some of the economic development things that I've titled this speech. One thing I've learned is Kentuckians can compete. You give them a chance, they can compete. And used to say at Data Beam, once a year, we'd put our shoes on and we'd go out to California and we'd announce new products. And about every year we won some product category with what we did. We sent a young man to Microsoft. They licensed our technology to put in one of their products. And we had to send one of our software developers, who's the first generation college student from UK, out to Microsoft to train their people how to put this technology into their product. Blake Irving, the vice president of Microsoft, called me about a week later and he said, Lee, don't ever send that kid out here again. We're going to chain him to a desk and won't let him come back. He's one of the best and brightest people we've ever met. So we can compete, and we need to know that. We need to feel like we can do that. The connection between economic development and education is just a necessity. you know, if you just train people to do a task, and too many times the politicians think that's what we need to do. We need to make sure that people can have a skill and have a trade, and then we can attract companies to come here. Well, that may have been the case before, but if you don't have four-year graduates and graduate students who are going to come up with some ideas, and I'll tell you, some of these people who are trained can come up with ideas as well. If you don't come up with your own ideas, you're going to be assembling other people's thoughts, and that's not a big payoff. They'll go somewhere else if that's all they need. And so we have to have the combination of the technician level engineering student and the four-year and the PhD students who can really do both. The economic development cabinets here in Kentucky for many years were out there selling mainly cheap land and cheap labor. And that's not what people want anymore. You know, they want an educated workforce. Mm-hmm. And I know there are a lot of discussions now about workforce development and so forth. We just have to keep in mind, I say this at the KBE meetings, is that we don't want to just think about the training part of it. We've got to make sure that we teach the higher end of education as well. There's a governor one time, or somebody running for governor one time, that said, you know, what comes first, education or economic development? His thought was, if we increase our economic development, then we can invest in education. Well, that's backwards. You know, before there was a beltway around Boston in the technology area with all the job creation, there was an MIT and a Harvard. Before there was a Silicon Valley, there was a Stanford and a Berkeley. Before there was a Research Triangle Park, there were three outstanding universities. So which came first? The education did. And the reason people go those places is because they have an ability to compete around the world, which is where we compete now, with those people that are in those vicinities. And so we have to be able to build a community full of talented people. Thing that I did, and this mentioned starting the E-Club for the students to teach entrepreneurship. But when you think about entrepreneurship, I had one of our major donors at UK tell me one time, and he said, Lee, I don't think you can teach entrepreneurship. People either have it or they don't have it. And I said, well, maybe you may be right. I don't agree, but I know we can kill it. And that's what we've done in this state. We make investments in things that you see, feel, kick, and touch the next day, like real estate and mines and so forth. But we haven't taken a risk on things, and you have to take a risk. So we started a thing, we called it the Lexington Venture Club initially, where we invited people that had the ability to make investments, had the money, but they didn't feel comfortable with it. We had a luncheon, and we would invite some of our faculty members who were really doing exciting things to speak to that crowd. It eventually rolled into what's called the Bluegrass Angels now, and they've raised 4 funds. They're raising their 5th fund now to invest in people who have ideas that start up. Mm-hmm. You win some, you lose some, but there's a company called Poseida Therapeutics that started out of UK's laboratories, and they went public on the stock exchange just within the last year. And the investment that was made in them, $200,000, is well worth over $4 million to $5 million now, yeah. From $200,000. Yeah. And there are a few others that have done well. We need to publicize that more so more people would get the realization. And the employees that they hire make good salaries, and they create jobs, and they'll stay here. Kentuckians who start companies in Kentucky will stay in Kentucky, and the others may not happen like that. I started a thing which we call the entrepreneurship leave of absence, to let professors who had ideas and wanted to try them could take a leave from the university and then come back and keep their tenure. And, you know, if they, in cases, Dr. Bose told me in MIT that he took 1 year leave, but in Boston, you could find vice presidents of manufacturing, vice presidents of finance, people run the company. And he went back and did his research. But here, these professors need to take the time off to see if they can find the right people to help them run the company, or they can leave if they want to. That's what I did. I had to leave. But the entrepreneurship leave has been used by a few people. There are many startup companies. I meant to look up the number of them right now, but there are 37, I think, out on Coldstream. Some are small, but they have the potential to grow. But and one thing you hear a lot about the Golden Triangle. I gave a speech, I think, in Paducah, and the next night in Murray, he said people call it the Golden Triangle, but it's copper at best. It's not where it needs to be. But you have to create wealth where you've got a shot. But the key is if we can create companies, starting with Kentucky students who stay here and build their companies, many of them could be from Hopkins County or Knox County or other counties, and they'd love to go back and put some jobs in those home areas, I know. And if we lose them, we lose that possibility. Mm-hmm. So I think it's worth the investment to try to get our companies to get started here. To show you another view of how people looked at education as one bucket and economic development as another one. When I was teaching at UK, I had the patents. I'd founded a company and was spending one day a week with that company. And we got a new dean who called me to his office the first week, and he said, Lee, how do you think you can have a company and still be a full-time professor here? And I said, well, Dean, if I was still at MIT and I didn't have a company, I'd get called to the dean's office saying, why aren't you doing something that's worthwhile and creating some jobs? I said, so if I find I can't do both, I'll leave, which I did the next year and gave up tenure and just decided I had to take a chance. When I think about, Chris Kimmel and I don't know if any of you know Chris or not, he started he and I started the Kentucky Science and Technology Council, KSTC, some years ago. And we worked with the legislature to pass the 2000 Innovation Act so that the state could actually put up money and tax credits for people to invest. Mm-hmm. And the key was that the money would not be invested by the politicians because they would want to spread it out to their home districts and whatever, but it had to be for good ideas. So we were able to put a position in there that the Science Council would make those investments, and that's been another boon. When I think about what teachers can do in this vein, one thing is to talk about entrepreneurs in Kentucky, and I would encourage you to go to a website for a company called Awesome Inc. Some of you may have heard of Awesome. They are awesome. The three kids that started that just to drive my secretary crazy, wanting to come in and talk about how to start a company. And I'm so proud of them because they're what I call an infrastructure company. Mm-hmm. They have a company, but they're trying to make it so that other people can have companies. But one thing they did is they started an entrepreneurship hall of fame. You've got John Y. Brown, you've got W.T. Young that started the peanut butter company and many other things that he did. You've really got some innovators. They have a website that talks about the Kentucky entrepreneurs. They have videos, what they call the founders videos. And, if you are looking for somebody to write a book report or write a speech, you ought to direct them toward that Awesome Inc. website to see what's been done in Kentucky. When I started at UK, I had them put flags up around the campus about the fact we had two Nobel Prize winners. We had so many patents, and the idea was to get them to look up, to raise their vision higher than what it had been, but to see that we had accomplished stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think that if your young students could read about that, it might give them some understanding of what can be done here in this state. I do believe in encouraging STEM education at the earliest level possible before they get intimidated by it or somebody tells them it's too hard, because and I know there's a lot of work going on in that area now. And I've been involved in quite a few grants. The Advanced Kentucky, I'm not sure how many people have taken part in that, but it was started with ExxonMobil money. And the focus was to offer classes that weren't typically offered in some of the rural schools and the AP classes. The real key was that they weren't going to put any stops in place. Didn't matter what grade you had or whatever. If you wanted to take a shot at it, you could take a shot at it. And it's been very refreshing to see what happened. I do a radio interview on WEKU, and if you go to their website, you'll hear some of those interviews. They're archived on there. But one young lady said that she was big into soccer when she was in high school, but she heard that there's going to be a AP class in biology. She thought, well, might as well try. Don't know if I'll do it or not. she took it. She took the test, and Advanced Kentucky pays the fees for the test. They pay for the travel for kids to go off site and have more education on the weekends with star teachers. But she got her grades and she had a 5 on the AP. And she told her mother, said, "This is wrong. This can't be right. I'm not a 5." It turned out she was a 5. She just graduated in engineering at UK and got a job with Lockheed Martin.
Wow.
But while she was at UK, she offered a lunch for girls who visited UK and wanted to hear about engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And she'd get the UK engineering women to meet with her. And so I'm real proud of Advanced Kentucky. And it's had, I think it's had an impact on some, but it maybe needs to be broader than that. If you can use your influence to try to, I think your mental health counseling is probably your first priority, but getting some professional counseling somehow, whether it's on a part-time basis or whatever, find a way to try to target these students for what they're going to be best at. And because in many cases, the parents really don't know. Their students are more advanced than the parents are, so they need help as well. So I may stop with that and answer any questions. I don't know how you go about asking questions, but I'm not even sure how much time I've taken so far. I'm probably pretty close to your deadline.
Yeah, I believe when I was in high school, I participated in a program very similar to something you were just describing. I'm not sure if it was the same one or not, but I remember I was pretty good at math. I was in AP calculus. It wasn't my passion, but I think I was driven up to UK for a day, and we got to spend the day hanging out with their female engineering students.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that being really impactful. Again, it wasn't really my cup of tea, but
Yeah.
Had it been something I was interested in, it was such a cool day. We were building things and problem solving and doing all this stuff. And it was a really cool experience. So I think I agree. Opening up opportunities to kids to see what is possible it's a huge thing, opening those doors and showing them what they can do. Yeah. I love what you were talking about, investing in Kentucky and investing in Kentucky students, and how when people start their businesses here, if they are Kentuckians, they tend to stay here. And that's how we grow our economy. I love that. I can't, I don't think I can drive that home enough, but it requires that investing in our students part. And so if you could talk a little bit about it, because it seems to me like this is probably your passion on KBE, is investing in those Kentucky students. So if you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing maybe currently or working on, or you can share some behind the scenes stuff of ways that you're planning to advocate for that, because I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, the Bluegrass Angels have made, I forget how many total investments now, but they are in Kentucky kids, and a lot of them are not professors or not their students. And Awesome Inc. does have some funding to invest in startups. Mm-hmm. I think UK now has some as well. The Science and Technology Council does. But personally, I'm working with 2 companies, not working officially, I'm just mentoring these 2 companies. One of them is made up of a group of 3 UK medical professors who have been working on Parkinson's disease for a number of years. And they have some very unique approaches to how you can deal with that. And I'm mentoring them. They're trying to raise funding right now. And the hard part is, and typically when I came back, I was trying to raise money for 7 years, and I wasn't involved with coal, whiskey, tobacco, real estate. I trying to talk about cathodochromic technology and flight simulation, and it didn't ring many bells. But we do have an audience out there now through Bluegrass Angels where they can meet and pitch their ideas and watch other people pitch. Even there's what's called 5 by 5 that Awesome Inc. provides, where they have people come in and you have an audience made up of potential investors, and you have these folks give their ideas of what they want to do, and then people in the audience choose to either invest or not. And I would be on the lookout for that. Again, Awesome is a good place to look. I've worked with another company called Space Tango, which started out with another student at UK when I was there, and it has the right, one of only 2 companies that have the right to put experiments on the International Space Station. And so they work with companies that want to see what impact that weightlessness has and on their potential products. And so they charge a fee to put the experiments together and get them past all the requirements that NASA puts on in order to go into a shuttle. They work a lot with SpaceX. And when the experiment goes up, it plugs into a cabinet that Space Tango has made that's on the shuttle or on Space Station, and stays there for 10 or 12 days. And they return it to the investigators, and they see what impact was taking place there. And that is a pretty unique opportunity. The head of NASA came last year and before the pandemic hit us and visited them for half a day, because he said, we need companies like you doing this kind of thing to make space travel, useful. Mm-hmm. The third one I'm working with is a fellow. I met him when I was advisor for ODK, Omicron Delta Kappa, the leadership organization. He was a student I met at that time. And then when I went back to teach a few years later, he became a professor at UK. He was the first person to take an entrepreneurial leave. He has a company with a lot of folks that can do predictions on weather trends around the world. And he set up a company. He works with the World Bank. He works with Oxfam. He works with the German and British governments to provide funding for countries that mostly are poor countries. They're going to get hit by a monsoon, and they loan them the money before the monsoon comes. And that way they can shore up their properties. They can move to higher ground. They can do what they want to do to get their stuff out of the disaster zone. Mm-hmm. And then they can recover better. They give them a loan afterwards too. Right. But he predicted a dust storm that hit Mongolia, where the dust storm killed most of the cattle in that country because of the dust being breathed by the animals. And so his is pretty sophisticated, the technology that he uses. It's all computer driven stuff. And trying to put him with some investors now. Part of it is trying to convince him how to sell his own ideas. If you talk to him, he'll wear you out for 30 minutes. And at the end of that, you still don't know what he's talking about. So that's one of the communications issues when you say a broad education. Speech classes are invaluable, I think, for students. They just need to be able to make a pitch and say what they have to say. So that's how I'm spending my time. Plus, Patsy and I have a new granddaughter. It's 2 years old, and that's made retirement a whole lot more fun.
I bet.
Yeah, but you're right. I do a lot of speaking. I'm speaking to a class this week later at UK about entrepreneurship, and we just got to get a conversation going about it. Mm-hmm. People realize that if they see some of their neighbors who made a good return on some investment that their neighbor didn't understand, that they might take a shot at investing as well.
Right.
And the beauty, I'd say about the angels, is that they invite entrepreneurs to come in and make their pitch, and there are about 80 people in that angel network. And after they leave, the people in the audience kind of rate where they think they're worth investing or not. They have a group of 6 people who make the final decision on the investment executive committee. And they provide them some money, but then they help them find other money. So if that company they gave $200,000 to, they were able to help that company find the next $2 million from other sources. Wow. So there's stuff going on now, and that's what I keep threatening to write something up about the positives that are taking place in Kentucky now. We focus too much on the negatives.
We do focus too much on the negatives. And I think I could probably listen to you for another 2 hours because of all these fascinating things you're saying. And they're all Kentucky. And this is not what we hear on the news every day. We hear barefoot and toothless or whatever. I don't know. But you're absolutely right. Kentuckians are amazing. We all know that. We are Kentuckian. And we do amazing things. I could not possibly be more thankful that we have somebody like you on KBE who is representing the side of Kentucky in as amazing way fashioned as you are. It's kind of a public face of what we can do here and what's possible. And I love that you're there helping guide that. So thank you for that, for sure.
My pleasure.
Is there any, was there any questions that, because we are coming up on time, so I wanted to see if there's anything we wanted to get to.
Yeah, there's a question here. It's very similar to the one I asked that were chatting about earlier. So maybe we can do just a lightning round here. I'll ask one and maybe Paula can ask one. But first of all, thanks for being here, Dr. Todd. It's we're very happy to have you here. It's interesting to hear your story. Like we said earlier, I was in UK about the time you retired, so I was familiar with some of the stuff you did, but I didn't know nearly all of it. So thank you for sharing all that. I just wanted you to comment generally on the state of higher education. And, I know you're not directly involved in that anymore, but generally the state of higher education, specifically science education. And Dan had asked in the comments specifically about, how can we advocate for good science education? I know the Kentucky Academic Standard Reviews coming up, and just us as teachers, as parents, and as citizens, what can we do as far as that goes?
Well, y'all had a history of doing some advocacy last year, I think, or in last election. And but what I said to Trent earlier, I think I'll stick to is that you really have to segment the legislature into the people that you think can have some understanding of what you're talking about and have some ability to carry that story for you, because they can do it in committee meetings behind the scenes and times when you can't. I think we do have a governor now that gets that and understands it. You can also talk with their economic development cabinet, because they are not doing the cheap land, cheap labor stuff all the time now. They still want to bring companies here, but they also want to create jobs with that Innovation Act. But I do think you need to spend time, and just the example that I had given, we were challenged to be a top 20 university, but the state hadn't funded it and nobody had defined what they meant. So I told my provost one day, I said, we need to write a business plan for top 20. He said, oh, your faculty won't like that. They didn't like when you came in here as businessman. I said, well, it's not for them. It's for our donors and our citizens. But we did. We took 18 months and wrote a long, detailed plan about what we needed. And I personally, went around to people's offices, legislators' offices, and took them through it and answered questions, just myself and the legislator. And we chose about 30 or 40 that we thought would really get it. And that to me was the most effective way. You can go to the hearings that they have, but too many times you're shouted down or something, because the people who show up are the ones who don't want to have science, I guess. And I think you've got to avoid those in some cases, because they turn out to be circuses more so than events. But there are some legislators that are pretty sharp, and I do try to let them know, the ones I'm still in contact with, what all's going on, because I think we need to show them that we're making progress.
Right.
So
Yeah, absolutely. I saw you there last time in 2013 at the committee testifying. So we certainly appreciate your advocacy and all that.
That was that aerospace hearing. Well, your audience may not know it, but our leading export from Kentucky is the aerospace segment now. There's a lot of aerospace work going on in the state. And so I think that may have been the group we were both talking to, Trent.
And related to the next generation science standards.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you for answering that.
Sure.
That's all I have. Paula, do you have anything, or anybody else?
Yes. You mentioned just now, you said our audience may not know that. And that is a bit of a running theme with the stories you've been telling. Has there ever, I think I know the answer to this, but has there ever been a discussion about making a coordinated effort to put these stories out there, to publicize them? And I'm talking about more on a statewide intentional effort, because we want people to connect education to economic development, workforce development, and so forth. But they do need to know these successful stories, and that these are Kentuckians that are doing it.
Tom Martin, who has a program on WEKU, asked me to do interviews. I did about one a month. I'm actually trying to write a book now, so I've backed off on that a little bit. But I think they do have on their website some of those interviews. I interviewed a fellow who works for an energy company, but he knows more about aerospace happenings in Kentucky than any place else. I thought about doing a blog, but I think it would bog me down. I don't know. But I'm like you, if you got suggestions for things. I wrote a story once for the teachers called Why I'm an Engineer, and it was, they made a print of that and sent it out years ago. But if there's some way that you all could recommend we get these stories out, Awesome Inc. does it somewhat, but it's just, it's challenging, but especially if you can make them local. If you find a kid from a certain county that did something, you need to publicize the heck out of it. And I would give speeches, and I remember going into Harlan giving a speech one day at a Kiwanis meeting or something. And I told the fellow who invited me, I said, I feel badly about doing this in a way. I said, it's what I call the foam rubber pillow effect. While you're there talking, it's like you got your finger pushing in on a foam rubber pillow. And when you leave, it goes right back to where it was, because they just kind of, that was interesting, and walk off. You got to, but he said something that really was profound. He said, but you gave them some hope. I was talking about the fact, instead of flattening that ground outside for $1 million to get a cookie company here, you could put a satellite dish on a trailer on the side of a mountain, and teachers could be writing software about the new programs they're developing to teach our kids. There are things you can do now with software you couldn't do before, and you don't have to have land masses to do it. So we've got to get people to think differently and give them some hope. Our drug problem is due to the fact people don't have hope. They think that play the lottery and take drugs, and we got to correct that somehow. So, but if you come up with any ideas about how best to inform people, I'll make a list of these things.
I was going to say, you said that, and now my brain's whirling, but I have your email address, so we'll be in touch now.
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and call it. I think I could talk to you, listen to you talk, and tell stories for another 2 hours. You're just ridiculous.
No, it's fascinating.
Fascinating. And I'm
Thank
so
you.
proud that you are a Kentuckian and that you continue to represent all of us so very well. And I'm very thankful for that. I want to go ahead and wrap it up, guys. Thank you again, Dr. Todd, for being here tonight. If you were interested in learning more about pensions, tune into KET right now, because I believe that's what they're talking about on Kentucky Tonight. And next week, we will be back with Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman, and I'm really excited about that too. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you again to Dr. Todd.
Thank you, Dr. Todd.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everybody have a wonderful evening. As always, we are 120 strong.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Good luck. Bye-bye.
Bye.